Thank you all so much for joining us. We are very excited to have you with us. I'm Lisa Conway, VP of Sustainability from Interface. And I'm excited about this one because this is the last in our series we actually have all of the rest of the recordings from the manufacturer series available at materialsCAN.org, and I will share that website again with you as well as we go. I would also like to give a little bit of background on what materialsCAN is. The Materials Carbon Action Network is a group of organizations that are interested in raising awareness and providing education around the embodied carbon of materials. So we started back in 2018. We launched our collaborative. We're now part of the Building Transparency nonprofit umbrella that also houses the EC3 tool that you may have heard of, the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator. And in our group is GC Skanska, design firm Ganzert, Armstrong Ceilings, CertainTeed, USG representing wallboard, Superior Essex Communications Cabling, and also Kingspan insulated panels. So we're really excited today to bring to you some information from the Interface perspective about how we think about embodied carbon. And you can receive more information on materialsCAN and also get the recordings of the previous in the series at www.materialscan.org. You can also access it via buildingtransparency.org as well, which is where the Embodied Carbon in Construction Calculator tool is. So with that, I wanted to introduce our speakers from Interface specifically. We have Sally Burek joining us. She's our manager of global supply chain. In addition, we have Kathy McDuffie on the line, whose picture is not here, but you may hear her voice at the end. She's our VP of global procurement. Aidan Ganzert, who's our LCA specialist. LCA stands for Life Cycle Assessment Specialist. And then also Emily Pryor, who is joining us from Manufacture 2030. She's the head of customer success, and we've been working closely with Manufacture 2030 in order to lower the carbon footprint of our manufacturing. So we're excited to have her join us and also share a demo of their tool as well. So with that, we are going to first start off with Sally, who's going to talk to all of us about how we at Interface talk to our suppliers. So Sally?
Thanks, Lisa. I do look forward to sharing some of Interface's history and experience around sustainability. My background, just a little bit, has mainly been in quality improvement in manufacturing, mostly utilizing continuous improvement and lean manufacturing tools. I'm an ASQ certified lead quality auditor and manager of quality and organizational excellence, and also a certified Lean Six Sigma black belt. I've worked with Interface for about 17 years, mostly in a continuous improvement role. The last year or so, I started working with the global supply chain team additionally in a continuous improvement role, working with our suppliers in the area of quality and sustainability. Ray Anderson, the founder of our company, after he'd been in business for about 21 years, read a book by Paul Hawken called The Ecology of Commerce, and walked away with what he described as a spear in the chest moment. And his conclusion from reading that book and his epiphany was that there had to be a better way and a more sustainable way to manufacture and distribute carpet. So what that turned into from a Interface standpoint was our new mission, which in 1994 became Mission Zero, which was Interface's promise to eliminate any negative impact the company had on the environment by the year 2020. And he really wasn't doing it for marketing purposes. He was doing it because he had grandchildren at the time and wanted to make sure that he was passing on a better world than where it had been. So go ahead to the next slide. if you fast forward to 2018, Interface determined that basically we had achieved our initial objectives of Mission Zero and started trying to decide what was our next steps, where did we need to look. And through research, discussion with experts, looking at environmental trends, talking with customers and associates, led us to this new mission, which is Climate Takeback. And you can see on the slide that there's basically 4 pillars. Live Zero, which is about stopping emitting so much carbon into the atmosphere. Loving Carbon, removing some of the excess carbon already in the atmosphere. Letting Nature Cool, basically letting nature do its thing and the processes that are already in place to take carbon out of the atmosphere. And last, Lead the Industrial Revolution, which is about interrupting business as usual and making reversing global warming the more profitable way of doing business. So trying to restructure how business is done. So with that in mind, we looked at, from a supply chains perspective, where could we have some impacts? And that led us to our suppliers. We looked at impacts throughout the entire supply chain, products, people, factories, including our suppliers. And these were sort of our focuses for our 2020 vision. And instead of it being suppliers to zero, which is where we were focused in our Mission Zero initiative, we're now focusing and transitioning that to suppliers to negative. So having a negative and removing that impact on the environment. So Loving Carbon, which is one of the 4 pillars of our Climate Takeback, we're looking for that supplier support, particularly in the areas of using carbon as a building block in our products. So working with our suppliers on those raw materials. So on the next slide, we then started looking at our carbon footprint and tried to take a real holistic approach to that, looking beyond just our manufacturing impact, but looking at raw materials, manufacturing, delivery, installation, use, end of life, and including our reentry and product take back processes. So pretty comprehensive. And if you roll that into an actual life cycle assessment, what you'll see is here's our 2019 life cycle carbon footprint for Interface. And you'll see I don't know what color it is on your screen, aqua or green, the very first part of the bar is the raw material and production impacts raw material. You'll see that that's the bigger chunk of where that's having that impact. So definitely pointed us in the direction of working with our raw materials and suppliers. We've had some impacts on that over the last several years and reduced that by 54% since 2008, but obviously have a long way to go. I'm going to turn it over to Aidan, and she is going to talk about a little bit more about life cycle assessment at Interface. And then I'm going to come back in a few minutes and talk through some of just the specific ways that we're engaging with our suppliers to try to reduce that impact.
Sure, thank you. So I'm a life cycle assessment specialist at Interface. And life cycle assessment is very, very important for our role in helping our supply chain streamline the data that they have into a narrow goal. So while ESG or environmental social governance is regarded by some as an unnecessary to their governance roles, we know climate change is a very clear and present danger, and it requires actions from business leaders. Inevitably, when discussing measurement tools for ESG, particularly for environmental initiatives, you're bound to cross paths with life cycle assessment. And over the past couple of decades, this craft has remained as a critical transparency tool for environmental impacts associated with products and the supply chain. And ISO 14040 and ISO 14044 are the 2 standards that regulate life cycle thinking. In order to appropriately complete an LCA, you must comply with these standards. And if you have ever worked with a construction EPD, I'm sure you're very much familiar with a chart like this. Considerations for A1 to A3 are cradle to gate, and considerations from A1 to C4 are cradle to grave, and there's optional considerations for end of life beyond for reuse and recovery potential. Life cycle assessment is a tool to evaluate the environmental burdens associated with a product at each of these process stages. And a complete assessment encompasses the capturing of the materials, the energy, and the waste involved in each phase of the product's life cycle. And within this method, environmental impacts are quantified and opportunities are identified for continuous improvement. Now, I will clarify here that life cycle assessment is a tool. It's not one big overarching strategy. I can give you a lot of information over a lot of different time periods for a lot of different things. But if properly done, it can quantify things that are important to a company to know about, like global warming potential, ecotoxicity, acid rain potential, resource depletion, and others. And as expected, a detailed cradle to grave LCA requires evaluations of all elements of a product's life cycle, including raw material extraction and processing, internal manufacturing, transportation, use, reuse, and maintenance. And for many products, LCA practitioner will find that a majority of their impacts is upstream in their supply chain at raw material extraction and processing. And so for us, this diagram will show how LCA is used to measure the full mass balance of the product. Meaning to make 1 kilogram of a product, what are the quantities of raw materials, of water, of energy, and of packaging used needed? When this kilogram of product is made, what are the associated waste and emissions associated with this? And to answer those questions, it's never simple. There are multiple subproducts and multiple subassemblies associated with the final product. And as a result, there are multiple suppliers and value chains. As you can imagine, this complexity adds little to clarify what you're doing, but there are many ways to organize this data. Through all processes, inflows and outflows are summed together for a variety of indicators, which we'll get into later. But what we look at here is global warming potential, which refers specifically to the gases released that contribute to global warming. And of course, while there are many environmental indicators associated with our products, a natural capital valuation assessment of modular carpet has shown that in terms of monetary valuation of impacts, global warming potential is responsible for over 90% of our product impacts. Global warming potential is just one of the many life cycle assessment indicators that all products can have. Other indicators include ecotoxicity, which is a measurement of the toxic emissions to air, water, and land. Acidification potential, which is the potential to damage water and soil systems by increasing their acidity, and others like smog creation, eutrophication, ozone depletion, fossil fuel energy. But in short, whatever environmental problem you and your leadership team wish to address, just keep it simple when getting started. As stated earlier, the decision to organizationally address global warming potential came from a natural capital valuation assessment. Targeted manufacturing and supply chain initiatives about GWP, global warming potential, have led to significant footprint reductions for us over a time period of many years. And that's not to say that we don't examine the litany of other LCA indicators. This is just the way that we streamline our environmental impact data. With this in mind, we are able to move up on our supply chain and engage them in measuring their own carbon footprint, or best case scenario, the wide range of LCA indicators that are listed here. It truly takes a village to lower your carbon footprint, but armed with the supplier-specific data, we are able to engage our entire village in carbon reductions. Supplier-specific data, as it feeds into our LCAs, also benefits everything that our assessments touch. From the Carbon Neutral Floors program, EPD, sustainability certifications, and even our internal R&D. Of course, when we at Interface talk about our progress using LCA, we look very good because we've been doing this for a very long time. Getting suppliers engaged on a sustainability mission may sound like a moonshot aspiration for some, especially if you've already started this already, but I suggest to keep the conversation going. Many people have been looking into the resiliency of their company, and they are addressing climate change through carbon. So in an effort to remain resilient in the long term, we are seeing more leaders continue to align with ESG goals in ways unprecedented years ago. So I will transition back over to Sally as she talks more about the ways that we were able to gauge our suppliers.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted. So what I wanted to just spend a little time on, once we identify a supplier that we want to work with, through actually starting work with them, getting a contract, and then how we work with them ongoing, I thought I'd just step through our different processes in that cycle. So there's a strong focus when we have our initial contacts with our suppliers, when we evaluate them on their environmental footprint and their commitment to sustainability. We usually start with a self-survey where we have them, I think you're back up one slide, Lisa. Yeah. So we'll have them do a self-survey where we're asking questions about their permitting, what permits they have, do they track their greenhouse gas emissions, have they completed an LCA, do they have a recycling program, you know, any recycled content, have they considered any bio-based raw materials, what sort of green label or sustainable or environmental certifications that they may have. Next, once we've completed the self-survey and we've assessed their suitability, that we think we do want to consider them as a supplier, we'd continue to evaluate their product or raw material that we were considering. And some of the sustainability focused areas are listed here. So we'd look obviously at physical properties to make sure it met the needs of our product, but also looking at safety. Is it orthothiolate free? Indoor air quality is a concern. Does it have any hazardous materials? Would be some of the things that we would actually look at in our evaluation of the product. If the product then met our initial requirements and we decided that we wanted to move forward, we'd often get more in depth in their processes, their facilities, their capabilities, their sustainability footprint. And often this is in the form of an on-site audit. And even if the company doesn't have a strong sustainability story today, we're always interested in companies and industries where we feel we can have an impact, and companies that are interested in working with us. One example is our current LVT supplier, who currently, when we started working with them 4 years ago, had no recycled content in their product at all. And we've worked with them, and one of the products that we have with them now is 39% recycled content, and another product has 35% recycled content. So working with those suppliers, when we're doing the on-site audits, you know, we're looking at their environmental and quality policies, any KPIs around sustainability that they may have, recycling programs, again, safety certifications, their carbon footprint. Do they track their greenhouse gas emissions, pollution controls? So we feel like it's fairly comprehensive and get a good viewpoint on what their commitment to sustainability is and what their understanding of sustainability is. Next, if we did decide to move forward with them and engage, we would then start working with the contract and go through a contract negotiation. Some of the areas that are included in our contracts with our suppliers around sustainability. We may ask them if they have and or will work toward various sustainable certifications, whether those are floor score or NSF. So specifying which are relevant, that they're willing to, if they haven't already, publish EPDs or HPDs. If they're a key supplier or have a large impact, are they willing to do a life cycle assessment? We also want them to commit to ongoing improvement and be willing to consider recycled content or bio-based content. And then we also have a supplier code of conduct them to sign. Once we are on board with the suppliers, we have several kind of ongoing activities that we work with them on to build those and strengthen those partnerships and relationships. Working to develop and create innovations. In some cases, we're learning from them. In some cases, they're learning from us. We have periodic technical meetings where we might introduce alternative materials we're familiar with or other vendors for consideration. We often provide technical support and just technical resources to evaluate those ideas. We have quarterly business reviews. Sustainability is a topic considered in all of those. We have yearly evaluations to understand what commitment and what progress we've made in those areas. And then more focused on carbon reduction, we're in the process of obtaining, we've got LCAs from several of our suppliers. So getting those LCAs from the rest of our suppliers. And then over time, we anticipate setting some actual targets with those suppliers on carbon reduction. And one of the ways that we're working with them on that is through this Manufacturing 2030 tool, where we are helping financially support and encouraging our suppliers to participate in this tool, which provides an opportunity for suppliers to get ideas on carbon reduction projects, track those projects, and communicate progress in those areas. Interface gets some visibility at a high level of what projects they have going on and their carbon reduction. It's mainly confidential to the supplier. They're aware of the information that gets reported to us, but we found it to be a useful tool at all levels, whether those suppliers are already well down the road in sustainability and carbon reduction. And then even more helpful, I think, with those suppliers who it's a new concept and are just getting familiar with carbon reduction as something to work toward, that this provides a format and a communication tool and an opportunity for us to engage and communicate with them around that. So I will turn it over to Emily Pryor, who is with Manufacturing 2030, to give you a little more information about it. And I think if technology works, she's going to do a little demo for us.
Let's hope so. Thank you, Sally. So hello, everyone. Thank you very much to Interface for inviting me to join you all today. Just to briefly introduce myself, I've been at Manufacture 2030 about 3 years, and I'm the head of customer success, so essentially the head of our client portfolio. And I've been working with Interface for about 2 of those 3 years. In terms of Manufacture 2030, so you'll see from the next slide, we are a mission-led business and we're very much aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. So our mission is to really help manufacturers and retailers around the world cut environmental impact. So we work, as you can see from the brands on the bottom left, with quite a lot of different global businesses across many different sectors. And sometimes we work with manufacturing companies and their own manufacturing sites, where we help those sites really reduce their own emissions, carbon emissions and environmental emissions in general. And sometimes we work with a supply chain owner, like in this case Interface, and we then engage with their suppliers to really help drive emissions down within that supply chain. So my role is a sort of dual role across both of those elements of the client portfolio, and I have a team that then delivers those contracts. So although we're based in Oxford in the UK, because supply chains are global very quickly, we work in about 50 different countries. So it's just a very interesting and diverse company and role because of that. And although we have a software platform, the people and process element around that platform is just as important as the platform itself. So we work with the suppliers and Interface's supply chain through a software tool, but it's my team that really gives support to the suppliers and build relationships with them and help them with processes and understanding and ideas so that they can really accelerate their improvements. So just before we go through what that actually means and how we actually work with Interface's suppliers, I think it's useful just to start with the challenge that we're trying to address, just to set the scene. So we're trying to reduce Scope 3 emissions. So Scope 3 emissions is the emissions, the indirect emissions in Interface's supply chain at scale. And we're finding that a lot of supply chain owners, Interface included, have been working on their own emissions at their own manufacturing factories for quite a number of years. So they've been really driving down their own emissions. They're quite mature. They've made a lot of progress, but they're starting to look at the supply chain, and it's something that feels outside of their direct control, much more difficult and much trickier, partly because there are so many suppliers in a supply chain. And whilst a lot of the information that buyers have on their suppliers is useful, it's often retrospective. So it's what the suppliers have done last year. And many buyers are starting to say, well, I need sort of forward visibility. I've set targets for maybe 2025 or 2030. I need to know whether my suppliers will hit those targets and what they're planning to do to get towards those targets. So that forward-looking visibility is something that we hear coming out again and again. And then from suppliers, as we work with many of them through our work at Manufacture 2030, we're hearing common challenges from them as well. So they're saying to us that they're being asked by many of their different customers for the same thing: their carbon footprint, how they calculate it, what they're planning to do to reduce it. But they're being asked for that in many different formats. And that's something that's very challenging to suppliers, being asked for the same information in multiple different ways. And then you have such a range of suppliers. So you have some who are incredibly mature. They may well be bigger companies or more mature companies than their actual customer. Whereas you have some suppliers who are right back at the beginning of their sustainability journey, as Sally mentioned, maybe one small manufacturing site based in the Far East who are only just starting on this journey. So the sort of support that those different supply companies need, depending on their different maturity, is a challenge as well to build a one-size-fits-all approach. So that's the background to that challenge, but that's what we're trying to answer with the solution that we have. So in terms of the solution, there are 3 key steps. So I'll talk it through on this slide now, and then I'm going to, hopefully, if technology allows, jump onto a demo just to bring it a little bit to life. So the first step is this communications piece. So this is really critical to get the buy-in and the enthusiasm of the suppliers to want to participate in the program. So these communications are key. It's, from Interface to their suppliers, and my team work with Interface and Sally and her team very closely to really build these communications so that suppliers understand what's being asked, what Interface's purpose and goals are, why their participation as a supplier is critical to the success of the program, and what the expectations of the program are. And that communication is really important at the beginning to set the scene and get their buy-in so that as many of them participate as possible. Once that's done, and a supplier decides to engage with the program and sign up, we need to move to step 2. So this is really the first step, is this measurements piece. Now, this is not a data collection program. It's not data collection for data's sake. We're trying to move to step 3, which is improvement. The program, that's the rationale behind the program, is the improvement, accelerating supplier improvement at scale. But to enable that, we need a small amount of data so that we understand the supplier's current footprint, where they're currently at, so that we can see how best to advise them on how to improve. So step 2, which I'll hopefully show you in a second, is to understand their baseline, their current footprint, and then look at what they're already planning to do to start driving some improvement. And that's where we move to step 3. So this is a mixture of, through the tool, online and offline support in order to really accelerate supplier improvement based on the hotspots and issues that we've identified in step 2. So the outcomes of the program are really aiming to drive down carbon at scale, get better business intelligence both for suppliers and for Interface, and do it in a time and cost-effective manner. So it's not something that should be taking an enormous amount of time for the suppliers. It should be something that can be embedded into their usual ways of working. So that's just an overview of the solution. I'm now going to try and share my screen. And possibly Lisa needs to give me the ability to do that. Yeah, okay. And I'll just show you into the tool. So I think, can I just confirm possibly with Lisa that you can now see my screen in front of me? I'm going to take that as a yes. So hopefully, if you can, great, thank you. Just to be sure, I'll talk you very briefly through step 2 and then step 3. So this is the tool you can see in front of you. When we work with Interface's suppliers, we generally work at their site level, so just the sites of the supplier company that supply Interface. And we usually work with staff such as their environmental health and safety manager, their engineering manager, possibly a continuous improvement manager, those sorts of job roles. And the first thing the suppliers are asked to do is to input the amount of energy they've used in the different fuel types relevant to them over the 12-month period so that we can understand their current carbon footprint. So they pick out the fuel types relevant. In my example here, you can see this site has said they use diesel oil, electricity and natural gas, and they've put in the amounts that they use over the past 12 months. And the tool actually then generates them an automatic carbon footprint for their site. If they've got something more detailed, they can overwrite it. But this is for, especially for the least mature suppliers, they find it really useful to get that carbon footprint and understand what the resource intensity at their own site is. And then we actually normalize that data so we understand how much of it is for relevant to interface by taking the production weight of the site and then the percentage that goes to interface, so that we can report back to interface what percentage of that carbon footprint is applicable to them, so that we understand the supply site's baseline, where they're currently at and where we need to improve from. The suppliers are then asked to build an action plan, and you can see an example of this on my screen in front of you. So suppliers might be working on everything from waste management programs to checking their boilers, to compressed air programs, to things to do with their heating, ventilation, cooling. It can be really diverse, their action plan, but all these different projects add up to help them reduce their carbon as they're going along. Now, some very mature suppliers will be able to build an action plan very quickly, very easily, and it will be very comprehensive. Some much less mature suppliers will need support to do this, and this is where they can start using the tool to do so. So the tool helps in a numerous different ways. One way is through this actions database, where suppliers can log in, have a look through best practice projects on energy, water and waste that have been recommended by all of our expert partners, including the US Department of Energy, and they can pick out the projects that are relevant to them, or they can ask for advice from our team, and that's how they can really build their action plan and improve it and make sure that they're accelerating their progress. They also get tips and advice on each project, which they can have a look at to understand how better to implement the project and how to do it more quickly and with better results. And they can also have access to a global network of their peer engineers also using this tool through the discussion forums that are within each project. So there are a number of different ways that suppliers have through the tool to really help them get new ideas, build their action plan, improve their action plan, and make better and quicker improvements so that they're really driving that carbon footprint down. So there are a number of different reports and things within the tool as well that suppliers can access, but I think in the interests of time, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can just pop back to the slides so that I will just wrap up from there. So I'm just going to stop sharing. There we go. And I'll hand back to Lisa to reopen the slides. And hopefully that's just given you a quick flavor of what the tool does. But that's really the step 2 and step 3 is just to give you a flavor of that measurements bit so we understand where they are, and step 3 where we're really driving the improvement. So some of that's through the tool as I've shown you, but on top of that, my team also work very closely with the suppliers, really build relationships with them so that we can help them improve by giving them advice, pointing them in the right direction of resources, maybe some training, some additional information and advice so that they're really furthering that improvement as fast as possible. So just to really summarize, I think it's a couple of slides in advance. If we just go forward one more. Just to summarize, sorry, back one slide, Lisa. Thank you. I just wanted to pull off a bit of information about some of the suppliers we've already been working with. So these are 8 sites that we've been working with for over a year now. So I pulled off information about them because they're the longest running ones. You can see some interesting information here. So they've already completed 50 projects between themselves, which is fantastic. They've got 20 that they're all currently working on, these 8 different suppliers, and 44 that they've got shortlisted. So they're currently identified and they're thinking about whether or not to work on and which ones would be the most impactful. And it's quite interesting to look then down into the detail of the project. So the majority are energy saving projects, 66 of them are energy saving projects, quite a number of waste and water projects, but that's fairly equal. And then the projects that are other tend to be sort of behavior change projects that will affect energy, water, waste and environmental methodologies and reductions in general. And then in terms of the environmental savings, you can see both in terms of kilowatt hour energy savings, waste savings, water savings, the numbers are really starting to add up now for these 8 suppliers as the work that they're doing through the tool builds momentum. And the carbon footprint savings, this is something that most of those suppliers are just starting to calculate. So many of them have been inputting their kilowatt hour savings or their waste savings so far, but they've only just started doing their carbon savings. So we're hoping to see that number go up a lot more over the next few months as they start to get more familiar with that carbon saving calculator. But a really exciting start to the program, and we're seeing, you know, a lot of projects happening and a lot more momentum, especially as the suppliers are interested on what each other are doing and the fact that they're part of a group of suppliers working on this. So just very quickly to summarize, obviously some key benefits for Interface, including that visibility of where suppliers are at the moment and being able to see in the future what suppliers are planning, identify those risks and hotspots within the supply chain and tackle it in a scalable way. And then have some certainty that their reductions the suppliers are making are in line with any targets that Interface sets over the next few years. But for suppliers, there are also key benefits. So it's a simple ask. They can do this for Interface, but they can also do it for any other customers who are working with Manufacture 2030. So it avoids that duplication. There's also a very small investment from supplier side, but they should get a good return on investment. If they're working on energy saving projects, it will involve cost reduction for them as well. So there's a real key benefit for them as well. And obviously building stronger relationships with Interface as they work with Interface on this sustainability journey together. So really exciting program and a lot of enthusiasm that we're seeing from suppliers as we move forward. So thank you again to Lisa and the team for inviting me to present.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. As I said before, I'm VP of Sustainability in the Americas for Interface, and I get to activate our mission outside of Interface. So there is definitely a feedback loop from the market that happens between my team and all of our internal constituents. But the most exciting thing, I think, is that we get to take this mission of climate take back and make that matter in the market, make other organizations aware of really how progressive our mission is and how they can engage at multiple levels. So I just want to talk a little bit about our category and taking this to the market. So we obviously make a product that goes into interiors. Our primary specifiers are interior designers and those that might work for owners that might be on real estate or facilities teams. And a lot of the conversation around materials and a lot of the reason for selecting materials that go into interiors in the last 5 years have really spoken mostly to toxicity concerns. Will the product hurt or adversely affect people in some way that will be inhabiting the space that I'm designing? And obviously it would be a terrible strategy for designers to specify products that would adversely affect their clients and the employees that work for their clients. So additionally, some of the more savvy selectors understand toxicity of materials along a supply chain, you know, before they get to the space that their client will be inhabiting. We at Interface have an expanded approach to what has really been kind of coined a term as healthy materials in our industry. We look at toxicity for sure. It would be a really bad idea for us to poison our customers. But we look through an additional 2 lenses that aren't necessarily lenses that are considered part of healthy materials. For us, toxicity lives within the green chemistry lens. Circular economy is also included in that, specifically because the fewer virgin life cycle stages that a material has, the fewer supply chains we have to introduce. We can take product back and turn it back into itself in an ideal case. We also include embodied carbon, which is kind of why we're here today. And that can be a surprising lens for people who understand healthy materials to really only include toxicity. And I just want to give some context that we educate the market on for why embodied carbon is part of a health and materials lens. This is a slide from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control. And I want to take a minute to explain it because this is really important for getting stakeholders on board. If our only way of getting stakeholders on board with understanding or with appreciating, let's say, low carbon footprint materials, it would be unfortunate if we had to hope that those people all cared about polar bears or the environment, which feels very separate from ourselves sometimes. We want to put ourselves, our families, our communities at the forefront of understanding how the carbon impact of making products directly affects our human health. Those carbon emissions contribute to global warming contributes to climate change, and then climate change has an impact on human health. So I just want to take a second to explain this slide to really, I think, make carbon footprint of materials a priority for all. The center wheel that you see here is the things that we associate with global warming: rising temperatures, more extreme weather, rising sea levels, and increasing CO2 levels. That wheel is turning, or I like to think of it as churning, the environment. Those lead to things that don't necessarily make the nightly news. If you're joining us from the West Coast, maybe it makes your nightly news these days, things like air pollution. But everywhere, we're not necessarily hearing about air pollution on a regular basis. It's something that can happen slowly and over time. Things like changes in vector ecology. So this refers to insects. In this context, insects that can carry disease, increasing allergens, et cetera. That secondary wheel is just the things that you might not hear about or feel every day. What those lead to, though, is the outer perimeter. And I'll start with something like asthma. So climate change doesn't cause asthma, but climate change exacerbates asthma symptoms. So more people feeling more symptoms more regularly. The next one, Lyme disease. This is one that's personal to me and my family. Both my mother and grandmother have been diagnosed with Lyme disease, and both too late for the antibiotic intervention therapy. So how this is really tied is, as we have longer and warmer seasons, insects have more of an opportunity to breed, which means there's more of them, which means there's more possibility of infection of people. So that, in my family's case, has led to just extreme lethargy and exhaustion, and really has changed their lives and the way that they function on a daily basis. Things like respiratory allergies you might not think much about, but 5+ years ago, I didn't have any allergies to anything. Now it's all year round that I'm never feeling just 100% my best from a respiratory perspective. And then on here, even things like on the left side, forced migration and civil conflict. So we could think about middle America and farmers. They may or may not have the opportunity to grow crops on their land anymore. And that might mean that they have to move their families, and they may or may not have the means to do so. That obviously leads to significant mental health impacts. So all of this, that saving carbon in your supply chain of your buildings, all of that is really to lead to better health outcomes for all of us. So that might help in talking to others that you work with on project teams, or clients who, sustainability may not be a main driver for them. It's hard to find someone where health of their employees, of their customers, of their communities is not a priority. So with that, I'll just kind of move to this slide, which is really the great work that those that you've heard from before me, I get to talk about their great work and how we fit into the market from a competitive standpoint. There are increasingly online tools. One that we were an early a sponsor of so that it could get off the ground was the EC3 tool, Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator. That allows for you to do a comparative analysis like you see here by material category. That's available at buildingtransparency.org. You see here that those EPDs that Aidan does a lot of work to create, no one was using the information, right? For the last 25 years, we've been a leader in carbon footprint for the carpet tile category, and nobody cared. All of a sudden, there's real interest in taking action on specifying low carbon footprint materials. And we've been a leader in that, as you see on the left side of this. The really exciting thing is that on October 20th, we will be launching carbon negative backings and carbon negative products. Carbon negative is a positive thing. The values that you see here are technically positive values, even though we're measuring a negative impact. So what you'll see is roughly about a third drop in carbon footprint for all of our products. And then you'll even see a bar on the left side of the chart going on the other side of that horizontal axis to measure carbon negativity, or measure how much carbon has been stored in the product. And then we'll lead to what I think is the most exciting moonshot goal, which is thinking about our spaces and our buildings as opportunities to solve the climate crisis, instead of just measuring how much less bad or less less carbon emissions we can contribute. So that's really exciting. And I pinch myself that I get to work for this company and build on the work of Sally and Kathy and Emily and Aidan, and talk to the market about the possibilities. This is a really great case study that I also like to share to put all of this in context. We talked a lot about Interface and just Interface's contribution, what we do to lower the carbon footprint of our products. But that is obviously only a piece of the puzzle. This is a case study that was done by Kirsten Ritchie at Ganzert. And this is a 10,000 square foot case study. So it doesn't have to be, the new Google campus. It can be every project that you work on from a tenant improvement perspective. And this just was a look at the baseline scenario was built on what are my go-to materials. So if you're a designer out there and you have, it's a project, there isn't much budget, and you just want to, you have your go-to materials, right? You have your go-to paint, you have your go-to favorite carpet manufacturer, you have your favorite glass. So what is the carbon footprint of those materials? You can either look at the EPD, A1 through A3 that Aidan showed, or you can look in a tool like EC3 and just understand the carbon footprint of what you're specifying. Then you will be shocked at how much carbon footprint of your materials you can shed just by paying attention to the embodied carbon of those materials. This example here was a no cost, no performance trade-off. It literally was, these are the material categories that I'm specifying. Is there a lower carbon footprint option available that still meets my performance criteria and my aesthetic criteria? Sometimes you can find a lower carbon footprint material within the same manufacturer, and sometimes you might consider other manufacturers. All of this is really, I think, applicable to creating a low carbon footprint project. So in Interface's case, we purchase offsets for the small footprint that still remains of our products, allowing us to actually get to zero carbon footprint. So the green box that you would see on the right would actually disappear. And you can play a role in advocating with manufacturers to negate the carbon footprint of their materials. So you could go to the glass manufacturer and say, hey, we specified your material because of its low embodied carbon, but we would like to design a carbon neutral project today. Would you be willing to purchase offsets that will get your material to zero for this project? materialsCAN has guidance that you can provide manufacturers for purchasing carbon offsets so that you're sure that they're not just Googling, carbon offsets, 99 cents. That gives some guidance to make sure that they're purchasing high quality third-party verified offsets for that project. So with that, my last slide for you all is, this is just a great visual. We've understood we've understood operational carbon and operational energy for a long time. That's the tip of the iceberg that you see above the water that we know how to address. Within years 1 through 3, so the early phase of the project, operational carbon isn't even the tip of the iceberg, or the carbon footprint of a project isn't even the tip of that iceberg, which is operational carbon. The main portion of it is specified, or you can think of it as purchased emissions. So no one is picking materials thinking about their embodied carbon and how high it can be right now, which is why we're providing this education to specifiers. We need that part that's under the surface that we're just beginning to understand, but is the largest in the early days of a project. We need that to be paid attention to. And really, it's easy to chip away at it once you start understanding what the embodied carbon is of materials that you specify. So with that, I believe that, yep, we're just going to move to Q&A. So I'll invite all of our presenters back to address any questions that you have. I'm also going to stop sharing. Just give me 1 second. And you can drop any questions that you have in the chat, or I believe I can give everybody the opportunity to unmute themselves. Oh, I see that Franco is on. Franco, hello, one of our great suppliers. So from Aquafil, it's so great to see you. Let's see, okay. Yes, you all should be able to unmute now if you would like to, or you can drop any questions, comments, feedback in the chat as well. So I'll give you a second to do that. Will this presentation be sent out? Yes, it will. Well, the recording will be posted to materialscan.org, and I will be sharing it with everyone so you can access anything that you need to from there. If there are specific slides, feel free to ask. Is Interface considering certification such as a B Corp? I'll take that one, and we have looked into it in the past. One of the things, however, that we would like to prove as a company is that you do not have to be a B Corp. You can be a publicly traded corporation who has shareholders. One of our extended shareholders includes the environment, but we want to be able to prove that we can do well by doing good. I think that that is in some ways more important than being certified as a B Corp, because we have to show the way, and we have to be able to show other manufacturers and other organizations in general that this can be done, and that you don't have to be a B Corp to be able to do it. So that has been our stance in the past. Does California lead in interest to reducing carbon footprint in the US? That's a big question. I would say that the policies are in place in California in order to lead. I think that we often have the most interested parties from a customer perspective in California. there has recently been introduced Buy Clean legislation, which you may have heard of. Buy Clean legislation actually, and it's been passed legislation, it actually provides a pathway to low carbon footprint decision-making on materials. So it starts with disclosure, so things like EPDs, and for state purchasing to be able to only procure products that have that transparent information through an EPD, and over time gets to like a maximum carbon footprint threshold for a given material category. So some examples of that would be, you know, to set a threshold for flat glass, to be able to not exceed a certain carbon footprint threshold so that there can still be competition. There will never be a carbon footprint threshold that is required where there isn't competition when there's public purchasing, obviously. So yeah, and I would also say there's also some great policies like the carpet recycling legislation, where California is the only place that has passed, and those recycled content streams are really required. Aquafil knows this. Really required to be able to get that recycled content, in our case nylon, back to our suppliers so that they can sell it to us as recycled content. The main driver for carbon footprint in carpet tile is the nylon. So we want to make sure that we get as much non-virgin nylon as possible.